What is consciousness? I am using the word consciousness not only as mere existence but also to include the turmoil in that existence, all the mischief, all the trouble and anxiety, all the fear, the pleasure, the sorrow, the love, the hate, and the hurts that one receives. All that is implied in that word consciousness. Consciousness means the total content of one's life. So, is one aware of the total content of consciousness or only aware at different times of different parts of consciousness? You see, one is aware that one is hurt psychologically. One is also aware that one is hurt physiologically. After all, they react upon each other and so on. One may be aware of that hurt for a certain period, say for a day or two, and then one moves away from that hurt to pleasure. So, you see, we are never concerned with the totality of consciousness. We are only concerned with parts of it. Consciousness reveals itself in the mind as a fragment. I am not sure. Wait a minute. I would like to be clear on this point. Does consciousness reveal the part in the mind, or is it that as thought? Please let me go slowly. In itself is a fragment. Thought in itself is a fragment. We can only see the fragmentation of consciousness. Let us be clear about this. I am hurt psychologically. Somebody says something brutal to me and I am hurt. That hurt is part of my consciousness. Just a minute, let us go slowly. Thought is part of consciousness. Thought is a fragment. It is a limited movement. Now, that limited movement, that fragment says, I am hurt. Now remember, thought being in itself a fragment, it cannot see the whole. Thought doesn't say I'm hurt. I say I am hurt. I say I am jealous. I am anxious. We have to go very slowly into this question of the I. The I is put together by thought. The name, the form, the attributes, the qualities, the characteristics, all that thought has put together. That thing, That major structure, which is the me, the I, has been put together by thought. So, when somebody says something brutal, I say I am hurt. Thought doesn't say that. Who says I am hurt? The thing that thought has put together as the me. Let us say, for example, that X calls me a fool. Now, in point of fact, I am a fool, but I don't know it. I think that I am awfully brilliant. But X comes along and says, don't be silly. You are nothing but an ass. You are stupid. I don't like it. I am hurt. In exploring that hurt, thought comes into operation. In exploration, I discover that thought has built the me. So, thought is never aware that it is hurt. Thought thinks that I am hurt. Thought thinks that the I is different from it. Thought actually thinks that. Thought thinks that it is different from the structure which it has built. So, thought can never be aware of the total content of consciousness. I can only be aware of the fragments. What is the content of consciousness? The content is everything that thought has put there, right? And thought, in examining consciousness, can only see the fragment. So, thought cannot fundamentally perceive or comprehend the totality of consciousness. That's simple. Your life is the life of man. Your life is the life of humanity, right? So you are not basically different from humanity. You might have a different colored hair, a different face, name, and so on. I'm not talking about all that. Basically, you are humanity. You are rest of mankind. Your consciousness is the consciousness of mankind. Mankind goes through all kinds of travel, all kinds of trouble. Every human being goes through the most terrible times. Now, doesn't everything else go through it also? Insects, birds, every animal and tree, all nature goes through various kinds of turmoil. I'm using the word turmoil in the sense of disturbance. If thought cannot be aware of the total content of consciousness, then what is it that's going to perceive the totality? Do you follow? Because if I don't perceive the totality of my consciousness, and I can only deal with the fragments of my consciousness, and the fragments are endless, there must come into operation a factor that sees the totality of consciousness, right? So, what is that factor? Is it the mind? Wait a minute. we are questioning whether it is the mind. It certainly is not thought. It certainly is not the brain cells brain. Let's proceed slowly. I think that we can be sure when we say that the cells carry memory, right? And memories are part of thought. Therefore, the brain as it is now, the brain that we are using, employing, cannot perceive the totality of consciousness. Thought cannot see it because thought is part of consciousness, right? The brain, the activity of brain cannot comprehend the totality of consciousness. Then we come to the mind. Can the mind perceive the totality? But first, what is mind? You see, I want to find out whether there is a state, whether there is a movement beyond consciousness. Do you follow? That is the basic question here. Therefore, I must understand the movement of thought. I must have an understanding of the activity of the brain, which is part of thinking. I must find out whether the brain can manufacture or invent or fabricate or produce a perception which is beyond this consciousness. I don't think that the brain as it is now can. So we are asking, can the mind perceive the totality of consciousness? From that question follows, what is the mind? Is the mind intellect? It is part of it, of course. Can the intellect perceive the totality of consciousness? Obviously not, because the intellect is part of thought, and the usage of thought, whether brilliantly or negligently or efficiently or loosely, is all the same. So, the intellect is part of the mind. The mind is also part of sentiment, emotions, feelings, right? Now, can sentiment, romanticism, emotions perceive the totality? The mind includes the intellect. The intellect is part of thought. Feelings, emotions, sentiment, romanticism, imagination, all that is also part of thought. I don't think emotions, sentiment, and all that can possibly bring about a perception of the whole. I don't think that sentiment, emotion, and sensation can ever offer a perception of the whole. I don't rule out the senses. The senses exist. As I said, when thought identifies itself with the senses, then the sensation becomes the me. Is love different from consciousness? We will go into it. That is very important. We will go into it because that is part of our consciousness. Love is part of our consciousness. Does the mind include love? Now, what we all love is based on sensation, desire, pleasure. I love you, I love something. So, love as we know it is part of our consciousness, right? Love with its jealousies, antagonisms, quarrels, and all the rest of it is part of consciousness. So, is there a love or is there a quality which is not part of consciousness? You see, the problem arises because while you have gone through all the other things, the intellect, the mind, the thought, the brain, you only discuss the senses as identified with the desire, which go to build up the structure of the self. My question is, have the senses any other role? Yes, wait a minute. Let's get it clear. I think I have got the germ of it, the kernel of it. When you observe with your senses, there is no identification with a particular sense, right? You see, the question is whether it is possible to observe with all your senses and whether in that state there is a single movement of thought. When there is a movement of thought, then it is a particular sense of operating. Let us pursue this further because as human beings, there is a natural curiosity, a natural urge to find out if there is a totality, different dimension, which is not the dimension of consciousness as we know it. I don't mean something that is invented by thought, right? And it becomes important to find out. You see, you have examined and negated all the known instruments that we have and with which we operate. Yes, as a human being, one perceives that one's consciousness is in total disorder, right? And any movement away from that disorder inevitably leads to illusions. Now, my question is it possible to bring about order? Let us go step by step. I am using myself as an example of a human being. My consciousness is in disorder. I am aware of it. I am aware of all the things that are going on endlessly in my consciousness: anger, jealousy, hatred, possessiveness, attachment, domination. I want to bring about order in my consciousness because I see the necessity of order. Order means harmony. The question is it possible to bring it about? Is it possible to bring it about? We have discussed consciousness, We have discussed thought, we have discussed the mind, the feelings, and so on. What instrument or what quality is necessary to move out of this enchaining circle of consciousness? I realize that there is a total disorder in my life. There is disorder, and therefore there is misery, confusion, uncertainty, quarrels, and all the extraordinary things that go on in everyday life. So, order is necessary. Now, who is to bring that order? That's my point. Will the mind bring order? Will feelings, sensations, imagination, all that bring order? Will thought bring order? On the contrary, thought cannot. All these are fragments. Yes, fragments. So, what will? Let's discuss it. Let's go into it. I am saying that the instrument which is seeing, the instrument which is listening is not corrupt. It gets corrupted when it gets identified with thought. That's right. It gets corrupted when it gets identified with opinions, with judgments, with evaluations. So, listening correctly, listening accurately is incorruptible. Yes, that is so. But is that instrument that will help human beings like us bring about order? If you deny all instruments, I must be careful here. What do you mean by an instrument? You are saying that the mind is an instrument, the thought is an instrument. Yes, the brain is an instrument, thought is an instrument. If you are using the word instrument in that sense, you would deny it. Yes, I deny it because this very instrument has become corrupt, and that which is corruption cannot bring about something which is incorruptible. And yet, I am bringing in something else. You say that is the other. Oh, yes, definitely. Now, wait a minute. I am a human being. My consciousness is in total disorder. I say, help me please to move out of this realm, this dimension altogether. Mankind has said this for millennia. Do you follow? So gurus have come and said, do this, and that will help you. But that hasn't brought about order. So one rejects all that totally, completely, right? What is mean by, what is actually mean by being a light unto yourself? Actually, it means don't look to another, don't rely on another, don't depend on another, don't ask another to help you. Is the light at all significance? Be a light to oneself in the sense, don't live in the shadow of others. Don't be a second hand human being. Don't rely on anything, on anybody. So, I don't rely on you. I don't rely on the church, on priests, on gurus, on scriptures. I don't rely on anything, but I rely on the common intention of man to find out something beyond this course, something which is not the priest's invention. Do you understand? And that is not the reliance on another. It is a cooperative inquiry. It is a matter of my personal salvation. So, to come back, what is to be done? We have abolished the mind, we have abolished the activity of thought, we have abolished the activity of the brain, which, as we know it now, is limited, right? We have also denied any pressure of the environment, of tradition, of pity. We have denied all pressure and we ask, how are we as human beings to discover the other? I am saying the moment I use the senses for something, they are identified with thought. Yes, that's obvious. But I cannot deny the senses, and I cannot deny that the senses in themselves are not corrupt. Yes, the senses in themselves are not corrupt. When the senses do not identify with thought, which builds the I psychologically, then those senses are natural. Those senses are healthy. Those senses are normal. Now, will those senses which are healthy bring about a total different dimension? Now, will those senses which are healthy bring about a different dimension? I don't know, because now the way one operates, they are never in that state. Therefore, is it possible for thought not to identify with the senses? It is possible, obviously. Is it possible for thought not to identify with the senses? It is possible, obviously. I see a beautiful object, human or non-human, and I can observe it without saying, I must have it. Of course, I can. There can be mere observation. But how do I posit other? I don't know. I don't posit the other. I don't know what order is. How can I know what order is when I am living in total disorder? I can speculate, I can imagine, I can theorize, I can cunningly, verbally, intellectually spin a lot of theories about it. But actually, they have no meaning. What has meaning is this there is disorder. What is to happen to move from this dimension to a totally different dimension, which is not the invention of thought? That is the question, right? Yes, that is the question. But we started out by defining each term as it came along so that we could have a clear picture. Yes, quite so. And we are very clear now, at least I hope so. Now, what is the action or non action necessary to move from this to that? This has been age old problem. It's not something new. And they have said, fast, pray, be a celibate, go to church, and mankind has done all that. Mankind has done everything, but still there is nothing but disorder. So, what shall we do? What is the action which is inaction that will negate completely this disorder? Is there a total negation or is it always partial? Do you follow what I mean? Do I negate attachment, then negate jealousy, then negate all the hurt, and so on? You see, that way is endless, right? So, is there a total negation of disorder? Look, sir, I am in disorder as a human being. I can separate the disorder, right? There is a disorder here, there is a disorder there, and so on. And in the very denial of a part, there is a denial, there is a certain type of order, right? But that is not total order. There is water in the harbor, but it is not the sea, right? It is the same water, but it is not the sea. So I can deny the parts, but those denials are never the whole, right? So I am asking, can there be a total denial of disorder? When the mind, when the thought, when the intellect, which is itself fragmentary, says, I deny disorder, then it is still disorder, right? Because they're all fragments. The intellect, the reason, they're all fragments. Now, what is the action or inaction that will say no partial denial at all? You use the word inaction. Let me pursue it, please. Is it that one is incapable of inaction? Is one incapable of not doing a thing about it? Yes, that's what I am trying to get at. We have done everything possible to clear up the consciousness, right? We pray, we fast, we beg, we follow, we sacrifice, we deny. There is this constant activity to bring about order, right? Yes, sir. Now, the question really is whether there is an action now the question really is whether there is an action which is non-action. You see, that is only possible when I really, totally, completely negate everything.